Sarah and Daniel Brooks looked like the perfect couple, until one rainy night, Daniel was found dead at the bottom of the stairs, and Sarah's act of grief began to unravel into a chilling web of lies, lust, and cold-blooded murder. Everyone in the quiet town of Ridgewood admired Sarah and Daniel Brooks. They were the couple everyone wanted to be. Their house, a beautiful two-story home with white shutters and a red front door, sat on a corner lot with perfectly trimmed hedges and a bright green lawn. People often saw them walking hand in hand at the local farmers market, or sitting together at the cafe downtown. Daniel, a respected architect, was known for his polite manners and steady nature. He had worked on several major buildings in the city and was deeply trusted by his clients. Sarah, on the other hand, ran a small yoga studio and often volunteered for local charity events. Her calm, graceful presence and warm smile made her popular among neighbors and clients alike. They had been married for 9 years, and although they had no children, they seemed completely happy together. Neighbors would often say they were the perfect couple. On weekends, Sarah would bake, and Daniel would work in the garden. Their photos on social media showed peaceful hikes, candlelit dinners, and vacations at scenic spots. To the outside world, everything about them looked ideal. They seemed to have it all: success, love, stability. But not everything was as it appeared. Daniel had started to become quieter over the past year. At work, his designs were less creative, and he seemed distant in meetings. Friends thought he was just tired, or maybe When asked, Daniel simply shrugged and said he had been having trouble sleeping. Some assumed it was work-related pressure. Others guessed that the couple might be trying to have a child, and the process was wearing on them emotionally. No one suspected that something much more dangerous was unfolding behind closed doors. At home, things were changing in subtle ways. Daniel no longer stayed up late with Sarah to watch movies, and they stopped attending social events as often. Sarah, who once enjoyed visiting friends, now stayed home more and avoided questions about Daniel's behavior. She would brush things off with phrases like, "He's just tired," or "he's focused on a big project." Slowly, without anyone realizing it, the warm light around their marriage began to dim. Sarah, too, was dealing with things only in secret. Unknown to Daniel, she had been struggling with debt and had begun spending beyond their means. She had also started an affair with someone she met at a yoga retreat, a man who made her feel alive in ways Daniel no longer did. Instead of confronting the problems in her marriage, Sarah began thinking of ways to escape it. But divorce wasn't an option in her mind. She didn't want to lose the house, the money, or her image. She wanted a clean break, one where she could walk away with everything. On the surface, Sarah and Daniel still looked like a couple in love. But inside their home, silence replaced conversation, tension grew, and trust slowly vanished. While the world admired them as Ridgewood's perfect pair, the truth was far darker. One of them was making plans, and the other had no idea that his life was about to come to a sudden, tragic end. The change in Daniel Brooks didn't happen overnight, but it became more noticeable with time. Once a man of routine and purpose, he began arriving late to work, often looking like he hadn't slept. His once sharp suits were now wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and his eyes carried a dull, faraway look. His coworkers noticed the difference, but didn't know what to say. Daniel was always professional, but now he seemed like someone going through something quietly, as if carrying a burden he couldn't share. At home, he no longer spent his evenings in the study, drafting new designs, or reading like he used to. Instead, he would sit on the couch, staring at the TV without really watching. He spoke less and smiled rarely. He was slipping into a fog that even he didn't fully understand. Meanwhile, Sarah's energy seemed to increase. She appeared more active, always on her phone or out of the house. Her social media accounts told a very different story than Daniel's weary expression did. Photos of smoothies, sunrise yoga, and inspirational quotes painted the picture of a peaceful, mindful life. But the captions were lies. Sarah had begun spending more time with a man named Evan Michaels. They had met at a wellness retreat 6 months ago, and what started as harmless conversation grew into flirtation. then into a full-blown affair. Evan was younger and carefree, and he made Sarah feel wanted again. With him, she didn't have to worry about bills, responsibilities, or the dull routines of marriage. He offered escape, but escape came with a price, and Sarah didn't want to pay it through divorce, lawyers, or public embarrassment. Behind Daniel's back, Sarah had maxed out credit cards and taken out small loans using fake business expenses. She had hidden the financial stress by intercepting mail and deleting bank emails. Daniel always focused on his work, trusted her completely with their finances. He didn't suspect a thing. When she suggested upgrading his life insurance policy, she did it gently, casually, mentioning how it was smart to plan for the unexpected. Daniel, tired and distracted, agreed without questioning her motives. The policy increased the payout to $1.5 million. It was enough to clear her debts, buy a fresh start, and leave Ridgewood behind. But the idea didn't feel real until Sarah started to imagine life without Daniel. No more cold silences, no more hiding, no more pretending. She began to think about it more often. What would it take? How would she do it? Could she make it look like an accident? The cracks in their marriage were no longer just emotional. They were becoming deadly. Daniel, who still believed they were simply going through a hard time, had no idea his wife was planning something irreversible. He didn't know that while he struggled to keep their relationship together, Sarah had already made up her mind. She wasn't looking for help. She was looking for a way out. And soon she would find one. 3 months before Daniel's death, Sarah made a decision that would set everything in motion. It started with a phone call to their insurance company. She told the representative she wanted to review their policy, citing rising costs and a growing concern for financial security. She sounded calm, collected, and even loving when she spoke about her husband's well-being. But behind her words was a carefully crafted plan. Sarah wasn't thinking about protection, she was thinking about profit. Their old policy offered a modest payout, just enough to cover funeral expenses and debts. Sarah wanted more, much more. She pushed for the highest tier available, asking detailed questions about accidental death coverage and the timeline for claims. The agent on the phone thought nothing of it. Many couples upgraded policies as they got older. Sarah made sure to sound like just another concerned wife. That night, she brought up the change to Daniel over dinner. He was exhausted, distracted, and barely touched his food. When she explained the benefits, he nodded. She told him it was smart and that it made her feel safer. He trusted her judgment and signed the documents without reading the fine print. Within days, the new policy was approved. Daniel was now worth $1.5 million dead, something he would never live long enough to understand. Sarah kept the confirmation email, printed it, and placed it neatly in her file drawer under household. She checked the payout clause again and again, memorizing every detail. The policy included full compensation in the event of an accidental death at home. No questions asked, no delays, just proof and paperwork. It was exactly what she needed. Over the following weeks, Sarah began watching crime documentaries and reading online forums, not for entertainment, but for research. She searched for stories of wives who got away with murder, and noted what they did right and what they did wrong. Her browser history filled with terms like untraceable murder, making it look like an accident, and how long after death can you claim life insurance. She erased the history regularly, careful not to leave a trail. She wasn't acting out of rage. She was calculating, patient, and methodical. While Daniel grew weaker, both emotionally and physically, Sarah appeared more energized. She started cleaning the house more often, especially the stairway. She examined the angles, tested the railing, and imagined She bought a new pair of rubber-soled slippers for Daniel, saying they'd be more comfortable. In reality, she wanted to remove any suspicion if he was found wearing them. Sarah also made sure to tell friends and neighbors how tired Daniel had been lately. "He's just been off," she would say with a concerned look. "Working too much. Not sleeping." She planted the idea gently, so if anything happened, it wouldn't seem shocking. It would fit the story she had been building piece by piece. Every step she took was careful and cold. Daniel had no clue he was living with someone who saw him not as a partner but as a paycheck. It was a cold, rainy evening in late October when everything came crashing down. The sky was heavy with dark clouds, and the streets of Ridgewood were slick with water. Most people were indoors, wrapped in blankets or sipping warm drinks, unaware that something horrific was happening behind the closed doors of the Brooks residence. At exactly 9:42 p.m., a panicked 911 call came through. The voice on the line was trembling and frantic. Sarah Brooks reported that her husband had fallen down the stairs. She said she found him lying motionless, bleeding from the head, and that he wasn't breathing. Paramedics rushed to the house within minutes. They found Daniel at the base of the wooden staircase, sprawled on his side. Blood pooled beneath his head, and his face was pale and lifeless. Sarah was kneeling beside him, crying and shaking. She said she had been upstairs reading when she heard a loud crash. When she came down, she claimed, she found him like this. Her performance was almost convincing. The scene was chaotic but oddly clean. There were no broken objects nearby, no sign of a struggle. A single slipper lay halfway up the stairs. The other was still on Daniel's foot. The lights were dim, but the area around the staircase was dry, despite the rain outside. The front door was locked, and there were no signs of forced entry. Everything pointed to a tragic accident, but something didn't feel quite right. The paramedics tried to revive Daniel, but he had been gone too long. His body was cold. Rigor mortis had already begun to set in. He was pronounced dead at the scene. Sarah sobbed louder, holding his hand and rocking back and forth. She told officers over and over that she didn't understand how this could have happened. Daniel was always careful. He didn't drink much, and he wasn't clumsy. But then she added, almost as an afterthought, that he had been tired lately, maybe even dizzy. Perhaps it was bound to happen eventually. The police took note of her statements and documented the scene. The lead officer on duty gave her a sympathetic nod and told her it was probably just a terrible, unfortunate fall. No arrest was made. No suspicion was raised. Sarah was comforted, wrapped in a blanket, and given space to grieve. But behind her tearful expression, she was already thinking ahead, thinking about the paperwork, the insurance, and the life she had planned without Daniel. Later that night, as his body was taken away, Sarah walked back into the house alone. She looked around at the spotless living room, the silent staircase, and the blood still faintly visible on the wooden floor. Her eyes didn't linger long. She closed the curtains, turned off the lights, and went upstairs to sleep in the bed she had once shared with the man she had killed. She knew the questions would come in the morning, but she also believed she had played her part well enough. It was, to her, the perfect crime. Detective Laura Benton had investigated dozens of deaths over her 20-year career, but something about the Brooks case stayed with her long after she left the scene that night. On paper, it looked like a tragic accident, an exhausted man slipping down the stairs on a rainy night. There was no weapon, no forced entry, and no witnesses. The wife appeared devastated, and the house was undisturbed. Still, as Laura reviewed the photographs later in her office, her instincts told her something was off. The first red flag was the injury itself. The report from the paramedics noted a deep wound to the back of Daniel's skull, far too severe for a simple fall. It was clean, forceful, and localized. Falls downstairs usually result in scattered injuries. Bruises, broken bones, scrapes. Daniel had none of those. Just a single, fatal wound. The pattern didn't fit. Laura requested a full autopsy, just to be sure. While she waited for the results, she began to dig into the background of the couple. She pulled financial records, phone logs, and old police reports. There were no prior domestic complaints, no history of violence, no reason on the surface to suspect foul play. Yet as she dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. Sarah had recently taken out a large life insurance policy on Daniel. That detail alone wasn't suspicious, but the timing was. The policy had been updated just 3 months before his death, and the payout was significant, over $1 million. Laura contacted the insurance company. She asked for the audio of the phone call made by Sarah to increase the policy. When she listened to it, she noticed how calm and rehearsed Sarah sounded. There was no hesitation, no back-and-forth discussion. It was like she knew exactly what she wanted and how to ask for it. Most people are hesitant when discussing life insurance, especially for a loved one. Sarah had been clinical. Her suspicions grew stronger. She visited the Brooks home again, this time with a forensic team. They examined the staircase more closely, testing the angles, checking for slick surfaces or structural issues. Nothing was out of place. The stair edges were dry, the railings were secure, and the lighting was sufficient. There was no reasonable explanation for such a fatal fall unless something or someone had caused it. Laura also requested Daniel's phone records and noticed that his call history had dwindled sharply in the last few months. He wasn't reaching out to friends or family like he used to. When she spoke with a few of Daniel's co-workers, they described him as tired, distracted, and unwell. One even mentioned that he had once shown up with a small bruise on his arm, though he brushed it off at the time. Small, disconnected clues, but Laura was beginning to see a pattern. The final push came when the autopsy report arrived. It confirmed what she feared. The injury was consistent with blunt force trauma, not a fall. It was the kind of wound caused by a heavy object swung with force. Someone had hit Daniel, then made it look like an accident, and the only person home that night was Sarah. Detective Laura Benton knew that if Sarah had killed her husband, she likely hadn't done it alone, at least not in motive. While Sarah had no criminal record and appeared outwardly calm and collected, people rarely carry out such cold, calculated acts without some kind of emotional fuel. Laura turned her attention to Sarah's digital life. She pulled phone records, social media activity, and email logs. As she pieced together Sarah's routine, one name started to appear again and again: Evan Michaels. Evan wasn't listed in Sarah's contacts under his real name. She had saved him as EM Client, a clever disguise to avoid suspicion. But Laura wasn't fooled. Call logs showed dozens of late-night conversations between them, some lasting over an hour. Text messages had been deleted, but enough metadata remained to show an undeniable pattern. Sarah was in constant communication with this man, especially in the weeks leading up to Daniel's death. The timing was too precise to ignore. A background check on Evan revealed he was a personal trainer and motivational coach based in the next town over. He had no criminal history but had been involved in a few messy relationships in the past. Laura paid him a visit, unannounced. He seemed nervous when she mentioned Sarah's name, shifting in his seat and choosing his words carefully. At first, he claimed they were just friends who met at a wellness retreat. But when Laura presented the phone records and the timing of their conversations, his composure cracked. Evan admitted they were having an affair. He said Sarah told him her marriage was falling apart and that Daniel was emotionally distant and cold. She had hinted, more than once, that she didn't see the relationship lasting much longer. Evan claimed he had no idea Sarah was planning anything criminal. He thought she was going to file for divorce, but there was one detail that stood out. Evan mentioned that Sarah once joked that her life would be a lot easier if Daniel just wasn't around. Laura noted the phrasing. Most people don't speak about their spouses like that unless something dark is lurking beneath the surface. Evan agreed to hand over his phone for analysis. Forensic experts managed to recover fragments of deleted messages. Some were flirty, others more troubling. One sent just days before Daniel's death read, "Everything will be over soon, just be patient." It was enough to show Sarah was hiding more than grief. She had a relationship on the side, a motive driven by both money and desire, and now clear signs of premeditation. Laura began to suspect that Daniel wasn't just an obstacle to Sarah. He was an inconvenience she planned to remove. With each new discovery, the picture grew darker. Sarah wasn't a grieving widow. She was a woman who had carefully built a lie, weaponized trust, and almost walked away with a fortune. But now the cracks in her story were widening, and Detective Benton was ready to break the case open. Detective Laura Benton knew that to close the case against Sarah Brooks, She needed more than suspicious texts and insurance documents. She needed physical evidence. Something tangible, something irrefutable. The autopsy report had confirmed that Daniel's injury was caused by a blunt object. Not a fall, but no such object had been found at the scene. If Sarah had used a weapon, she had hidden it well. Laura decided to re-examine the Brooks property from top to bottom, this time with a fine-tooth comb and a full forensics team. They began by thoroughly searching the house. Every drawer, every cabinet, every closet. Nothing suspicious turned up inside. The house was unusually clean, almost too clean, especially the staircase area. But when Laura asked about the detached garden shed at the edge of the backyard, Sarah claimed it was used only for seasonal storage and hadn't been opened in weeks. That answer struck Laura as too quick, too prepared. She ordered the shed to be opened immediately. Inside, the shed was filled with gardening tools, holiday decorations, and workout gear. On a shelf in the corner, beneath an old tarp, the team found a pair of 5-pound yoga weights. One of them appeared to be slightly cleaner than the other, almost as if it had been recently washed. Forensics tested both weights and under a UV light discovered traces of blood on the metal handle of the cleaner one. Blood that someone had tried to scrub off but hadn't completely removed. Samples were taken and sent to the lab. The results came back the next day. The blood matched Daniel Brooks. The shape and weight of the dumbbell also aligned exactly with the wound on his skull, as described in the autopsy report. There was no longer any doubt this was the murder weapon. Sarah had used it to strike Daniel from behind, killing him instantly. She had then cleaned it, hidden it in the shed, and staged the scene to look like a fall down the stairs. With this evidence in hand, Laura pulled surveillance footage from nearby homes to confirm Sarah's movements that night. One camera, from a neighbor across the street, caught a brief glimpse of Sarah leaving the house in the rain. An hour after calling, she carried something wrapped in a towel, presumably the dumbbell, toward the shed. It was grainy, and the face wasn't visible, but the timing fit perfectly with the sequence of events. The pieces had finally come together. The staged accident, the large insurance policy, the secret affair, the planted narrative about Daniel being tired and unstable. It was all a lie. Sarah had tried to manipulate everyone around her, believing she had covered her tracks. But she hadn't counted on a small smear of blood and a suspicious detective to unravel everything. Laura prepared the warrant for Sarah's arrest. She knew the confrontation would be dramatic, but the evidence was airtight. The woman who had played the role of a grieving wife was about to face the truth she thought she had buried. The morning of Sarah Brooks's arrest was quiet and gray, the sky thick with clouds as if the town itself sensed what was coming. Detective Laura Benton, now fully confident in her case, arrived at the Brooks residence with 2 uniformed officers. Sarah answered the door in a bathrobe, holding a coffee mug, her expression calm. But when Laura read the charge, first-degree murder, Sarah's composure finally cracked. Her face went pale, and her hands trembled. She didn't speak a word as she was handcuffed and led to the police cruiser. The perfect image she had worked so hard to maintain was shattered. The news of her arrest spread quickly. In a town like Ridgewood, secrets never stayed hidden for long. Neighbors who had once admired Sarah now watched in disbelief. People whispered in coffee shops and grocery store aisles, stunned by how the woman they saw smiling at community events could be capable of something so brutal. The story made local headlines within hours, and soon, national true crime blogs picked it up. A peaceful town, a loving marriage, a cold-blooded betrayal. It had all the ingredients of a chilling tragedy. At the police station, Sarah finally broke her silence. Her statement was full of half-truths and denial. She admitted to being unhappy, to feeling trapped in a loveless marriage, but she insisted that Daniel's death was still an accident. She claimed she panicked, that she only staged the scene because she was afraid no one would believe her. But the evidence told a different story. The blood-stained dumbbell, the new life insurance policy, the text to Evan, the surveillance footage, each piece pointed to careful planning, not panic. The trial began 6 months later. It was a media spectacle, drawing curious spectators and reporters from all over. The courtroom was packed each day. The prosecution laid out the timeline with precision, showing how Sarah had manipulated everything: her husband, her lover, her friends, and even the emergency response. They revealed how she had rehearsed her lies, cleaned the weapon, and created the illusion of an accidental fall. Every detail was calculated. Sarah sat quietly during most of the trial, her face expressionless. She showed no emotion when the dumbbell was brought out in evidence. No tears when Daniel's friends described the man he had been before he began to fade under the weight of her betrayal, and no reaction when the jury returned with their verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced Sarah to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. As she was led away in handcuffs for the final time, she didn't look at anyone in the courtroom. Her life as a free woman, as a wife, and as Ridgewood's admired neighbor was over. She had destroyed everything: her marriage, her future, and an innocent man's life, for greed and lust. Daniel Brooks was finally given justice, not by the woman who had promised to love him, but by those who refused to let her lies become the final truth.